Korean cafes are making headlines for serving more than just a cup of coffee, while its capital city Seoul has been crowned best city for pedestrians worldwide. Hello and welcome to Press Perspective for this Tuesday, May 12th here in Seoul. I'm Min Sun-hee. Coffee, city and Buddhism. These are the keywords of our discussion today. For more on this, I have independent journalist Kelly Kasulis Cho here in the studio. Kelly, it's lovely to have you here.
Always excited to be here, thanks.
I also have writer Colin Marshall with us. Colin, welcome back.
Thanks, I'm excited too.
Kelly, let's begin with the recent coverage by CNN under its series, and I didn't make this word, they made it, K-Everything. This time they covered K-Cafes. What was the story there?
Yeah, I thought that was funny that that's the name of the series. I remember when it was just K-pop and K-dramas, and then we would mock when K-beauty was coined, and K-food, they're still trying to push that. I don't know if that one's caught on yet. But yeah, it was a really interesting article about, kind of the unique cafe culture that exists in South Korea. And I would actually agree, it's quite unique. While parts of Europe certainly have, an amazing cafe and coffee scene, I think what makes Korea's cafe culture, very Korea specific, is that it really focuses more on the aesthetic or the theme more than the beverage itself, right? So a typical Korean cafe is usually quite beautiful. It might be centered around, like, say, a beach oasis theme, or, we have animal cafes here, right? So, like, sheep, there's a sheep cafe in Hongdae. It might be themed after a specific dessert, but it's more of an experience than it is about, oh, this place has a great roast or a great bean, although that kind of love for, like, a higher end coffee is also kind of coming up right now in South Korea in the same way that craft beer did a couple of years ago. But yeah, I find it interesting. I think what a lot of people don't realize is that, part of the reason why cafes are so important here is because people don't necessarily have a lot of third spaces in their life, meaning like somewhere outside of work in the home that they can socialize. While it's changing, a lot of Korean people usually don't invite friends over, for dinner or drinks. They tend to go out. And certainly young people who live with their parents or grandparents, like, they're not gonna go on a date in their home, right? So a cafe is somewhere that's open late, where you can, kind of buy a social venue, and you can have really beautiful atmosphere on top of it, and, this kind of open space that is very different from your typical kind of small cylinder box Korean home.
Right. And Kelly, just to clarify, when you talked about animal cafes and you talked about a sheep cafe in Hongdae, we're talking about Baba Black Sheep, that kind of cafe.
Baba Black Sheep?
Yeah, because you talked about a sheep cafe.
Yeah, yes, like the animal, the sheep. There's a cafe in Hongdae.
I've heard of dog cafes and cat cafes.
They have 2 live sheep that are kept in a pen, and you can pet them and stuff. And actually, it doesn't smell bad in there. I've been there a couple times.
Okay.
They have meerkat cafes, wallaby cafe. I've seen them all.
Right, all right. Colin, how do you explain the popularity of K-cafes?
Well, I've been to the same sheep cafe. They are, in fact, white sheep, but they do cycle them out periodically.
That's why I was confused.
Indeed.
Yeah.
But I could approach this through the lens of my own experience as well, because Kelly hit a lot of the points I would make generally speaking. But when I first visited Korea, I think I was sold on living in Korea by no one element more than the cafes. Cafe culture maybe oversells it, but the way cafes are here and the sheer number of them as well. As a freelance writer for my adult life entirely, more or less, wherever I am, when I lived in the US or traveling in other parts of Asia or Europe, I am in a cafe nearly every day, writing or doing whatever, and just kind of a default action for me. Find a cafe and go to it. And nowhere are they as comfortable or usable or convenient as they are in South Korea in general, and Seoul in particular. In Seoul, you're always near not just a cafe, but you're near several different chains, international and national. You're near a bunch of indie places as well, many of which express the personality of their owner, very sort of fascinatingly, sometimes memorably. And unlike in the US, you're pretty much assured there's going to be Wi-Fi. You're assured that there's going to not be a limit on how long you can stay there for the most part, other than the most popular hot spots in the most popular neighborhoods at the most popular times. No one's going to hassle you out. They're never really full, other than the sort of boom time when the office workers flood in around 1 o'clock in the afternoon. And what's more, especially from the American perspective, but this is true for Europeans too, you can go there and leave your laptop or your phone or your camera, whatever it might be, the most expensive thing you own, and you can step out, go to the bathroom, or step out for 2 hours, and it'll still be there when you get back. You can rest assured of that, which is just not a quality you find in many societies, let alone in many cafes around the world. So there is an endless list of reasons why I think they could catch on. And for tourists, many are Instagrammable. And this is true for tourists and Koreans as well. Instagrammability is a huge factor, not just in Seoul, but in other cafes outside Seoul, suburban cafes that have also been getting attention in the foreign press, which was a surprise to me. A while ago, I was traveling with my wife and kids to a cafe out in Gyeonggi-do, and the province surrounding Seoul. And as soon as you cross the line from Seoul to Gyeonggi-do, the cafes get about 20 times larger, much more ornate and elaborate. And one of them was this ancient Greek theme complete with ruins rebuilt on the ground. And so I think they're competing to be attractions as well in a different way outside Seoul. But I think the cafe lover really has it all here. And for a while, the coffee lover, I think, had some complaints about the quality of what they could actually drink, but that's come a long way too. And so it's no surprise to see K being stamped onto cafes as well, dismaying as it might be for other reasons.
Right. Kelly, Korea's love for iced Americano, it's no secret. What more can you tell us about the coffee culture that's unique here in South Korea?
Well, I will say you invited the right person on the show today, because I often joke that my blood is made of iced Americanos. I'm a big fan. I drink probably far too many a day, although I'd like to think that I've tapered it back. But iced Americanos are basically 1 or 2 shots of espresso over very cold water and ice. It's a drink that is kind of, getting picked up in American metropolitan cities, but as an American, when I first came here, the first time I had ever heard of an iced Americano was actually in South Korea, and it's derived from espresso beans, as I mentioned, so it's different than a brewed coffee. Even last month, I had some American friends visit Korea for the first time, and they really didn't like them. They said that it tastes like dirty water. It's a very subtle coffee flavor. It's quite watered down. Whereas now I can't drink coffee that's brewed or a drip coffee or a Dutch coffee because it's way too acidic and strong to me. I like the subtle iced Americano flavor. But Koreans, it's such a part of life now that they often call it aa. And you can even order an aa, and most places will know what you're talking about. I think the reason why people get so into this topic is kind of like where I'm from, Boston. People drink it iced, whether it's winter or summer, it really doesn't matter. And this is something that is kind of ubiquitous in the Korean experience at this point, but that wasn't the case even 10 years ago. So while mixed coffee, meaning like powdery lattes, a Maxim Gold in a tube, instant coffee, was a part of South Korea for a very long time. I mean, when I first got here, maybe 12 years ago, cafes existed, they sold iced Americanos, but they were rather expensive, and it wasn't a part of like a Korean person's daily diet. It was something you order to take someone out on round 2 of a date, but maybe you had it, once an occasion. And now, with the rise of mega coffee and compost coffee, iced Americanos are available for, instead of 8,000 won 10 years ago, sometimes less than 2,000. So that's like $1.50 in terms of American money. And so what you're seeing now is these big queues of people getting their hit of caffeine before they go to the office. And, the caffeine addiction has fully taken hold in the same way that Americans might say, like, Americans run on Dunkin', right? So it's been interesting to see that arc of a society literally getting hooked on a drink and on caffeine. I remember I brought a pound of ground coffee beans from the States when I was young for my emo, my aunt who lives here. and she brewed it completely wrong. It tasted like tea, and she brought it to her office in a big thermos to show everyone that she had like fancy American coffee, and it was her first time trying it. We're a far cry from that now. We're all addicted to a good shot or two of espresso.
Right, for sure. Colin, a popular scene, which Kelly alluded to earlier, it's that in downtown Seoul, of course, during lunchtime, is that of office workers with an iced Americano in their hand walking down the streets. Now, this brings me to our next topic, which I mentioned at the clip at the start of our talk. Seoul has reportedly been crowned the best city for pedestrians worldwide. Could you tell us a bit more about this humbling honor?
Yes, it may come as a surprise to Koreans themselves, or to Seoulites themselves to some degree, because although this survey was conducted ostensibly among locals, that's what Time Out said, I do find that this really is a subject on which foreign and local opinion divide sharply. And when Americans, for example, come to Seoul, this is the most walkable city they could ever imagine. And in part, they're factoring in the public transit as well. The Seoul subway is, of course, one of the best in the world and always improving. And the touristic experiences are, of course, walking based, so those can affect the opinions of the visitor. But I think when Koreans say that Seoul is not walkable, they tend to be thinking of the sheer size of the city, number one, and the fact that it's not uniformly walkable, that there are some neighborhoods more walkable than others, and the north of the city, Gangbuk, is generally more walkable than the south, Gangnam, where we are now, and things like that. But if you have a lot of places to go in Seoul, you tend not to be walking between them because they're just too far apart. Compare it to, say, Paris, which ranked, I believe, number 7 on this list, which you can walk across in 2 hours, which is not true at all. Here in Seoul, if you had 12 hours, I don't know if you could do some of the actual expanses of the city. New York was number 3. So you can see this list is a bit eccentric in some ways compared to what people would expect. But Seoul's walkability hinges on, or its reputation for walkability hinges on certain factors that have kind of outsized publicity around them. Number one being the Cheonggyecheon, the stream downtown that is walkable for its a few miles long length and replaced a freeway. So it was a symbolic urban project as well, and one of the, I think really the only urban development project widely known outside Korea that is in Seoul. There's another one that this list highlighted, Seoul 7017, which runs around the neighborhood of Seoul Station and is made out of a former freeway overpass, which is not regarded as successful by locals. It's not very useful to people, but it has been a tourist attraction as well. So it is, I think, a walkable city on the whole. I live here, and I've done for 10 years, and compared to certainly every American city, it's quite walkable, but I can understand why Koreans would say it's not. I do think that that choice is somewhat eccentric. It's a bit of an attention grabber, putting Seoul at number 1, and it's reflective in part of Seoul's general popularity more than its pure walkability. But I will always defend Seoul urbanism in all its forms.
Right, and beyond Seoul, Kelly, speaking as a resident here in the country, is there another Korean city that you would like to highlight that's quite good for pedestrians that foreigners may not be that aware of?
I think most major Korean cities are actually pretty walkable. The second one that comes to mind is the second most populous city, Busan. I will say there's less hills there, so my calves get more of a break when I'm walking a lot. But to Colin's point, I'm an American, right? We have one of the most painfully unwalkable countries there is, and so I find Seoul and Busan extremely walkable. I will say I have walked from like Sangsu Station area all the way to Gangnam, the majority of which I did along the Han. That was probably at least 20 kilometers. So you can get around, but right, it's not a small city. So Boston, you could maybe walk it in an hour, tip to tip. But I think what's nice about Busan is that you get the ocean. You can get more urban areas if you want. If you get too tired, you can jump on any kind of public transportation. When you start getting to, say, Gangneung or some of these smaller cities that are quite popular and touristed, Sokcho, those kind of areas, I would say they're less walkable in that they don't have as many metro and like bus connections. So even though you might be able to physically walk without getting hit by a car, there's a limit to how far you're really willing to go because you won't have the option necessarily to jump on a mall bus, a village bus, if your legs give out.
Right. Moving forward, Colin, I should have asked you this earlier. The CNN series on K-Everything that we mentioned at the start of our talk, it's led by acclaimed actor Daniel Dae Kim, who asserts that understanding Korean culture may actually help to ease discrimination against Asians. What are your thoughts, I wonder?
It was an interesting point to see raised because I think Koreans specifically have quite a good image in the US or in the West. I mean, better than ever. In a way, it went from not having much of an image at all or an unclear one to an almost uniformly positive one. Again, specifically in the US and mostly due to Korean popular culture, Korean food. Everything we can attach K to, I think, has been a boost to the Korean image. There is, of course, a line to be drawn between the sort of racial schema of Korea itself and of the United States of America, which is in some ways a much more complicated country in that sense, in that sort of socio-political sense. I believe it was highlighted in one article that this was the potential of this series to sort of remedy the anti-Asian prejudice that erupted during the pandemic was part of the goal here, or at least one of the positive effects that could come of this. And certainly there was the breakout of the virus in China, which that was seen to be causing prejudices at the very beginning. And then later on, a year or two into the pandemic, you had a very brief slogan, a slogan with a brief lifetime, Stop Asian Hate. And it arose from, especially in New York City, a few different violent crimes perpetrated against Asians and Asian Americans. But the slogan was retired when it was discovered that the perpetrators were also members of a racial minority, and often poor, and mental health problems as well were involved. So this was not a case of a simple social prejudice, but something more complicated going on. So I think this series will certainly, I mean, the reputation of Korea is so high right now. You always think, could it get any higher? Whether that will transfer to Korean Americans or Asians in general, I mean, this is another complicated factor because oftentimes in America, Koreans, Japanese, Chinese, Thai, I mean, they all get lumped together. So how much the positive image of Koreans in Korea or Korea itself actually transfers to Asians as a whole, en masse, in the US, I think that's harder to say.
Right. Kelly, earlier this month, Korean monks, they reportedly held a Buddhist initiation for a humanoid robot. That particular story was covered by our colleague Rafael Rashid for The Guardian. For those of our viewers who may not have read that particular article, could you tell us a bit more about this initiation and the humanoid robot monk?
Yeah, of course. I mean, love Rafael. He's a fantastic journalist, and it was a very good article. I recommend people take a look. I personally see this as a bit of a PR stunt, and rolling out a widely commercially available robot to bring interest in virtually anything is a ploy that we've seen time and time again. With that said, I mean, I think what's really interesting about Rafael's story is that this is happening against kind of a greater context of Buddhism being on decline in South Korea when it used to have much more of a presence. I mean, a lot of the historical buildings that tourists will visit here are very rooted in kind of Buddhist ideals and architectural styles and beliefs. But basically at Jogyesa Temple in Seoul, so near like Jonggak, Gwanghwamun area, they initiated Gabi, which is what they named this robot. This particular model of robot, you see a lot on TikTok and social media, particularly coming out of China. It kind of looks like a human. It's a true humanoid robot. It's got a really tiny head. You might know which one I'm talking about. So it looks like it's got really big hips and shoulders and then like a really, really shrunken head. So they added, more than 100 prayer beads, and they did a ceremony to initiate Gabi. But it's clear that this is trying to create interest and getting people to come to the temple and become introduced to Buddhist values again. In the article that Rafael wrote, he mentioned that 16% of South Koreans now identify as Buddhist, down from about 23% in 2005. And among people in their 20s, it's less than 8% at this point. And that, last year, the Jogye order ordained 99 monks, which is down from 200 a decade earlier. So I think there's a very real concern that, this way of life is kind of approaching more extinction. I don't think it's quite that dramatic, but I'm skeptical about whether or not a flashy robot that, frankly, most of us have already seen in videos is going to sustain interest more than this kind of original blitz of news coverage. It reminds me of my old office building at the Washington Post that has like one of those Incheon Airport greeter robots, the ones without the arms and legs. And it's just basically a screen with a face. And maybe you can ask it for a map of the floor, but I mean, it's pretty useless, right? Or those restaurant robots that bring dirty plates between the kitchen and the tables, if the customer puts it on the tray, by the way. I just think, you know, there are probably better ways to get people interested in Buddhism, whether it be as a philosophy or a religion.
Right. And staying with that, Colin, I wonder, what have been some of your observations with regard to the public perception about Buddhism here in the country in recent years?
Yes, with Buddha's birthday coming up, I mean, I've been looking into the history of Buddhism here as well. And as Kelly alluded to, it has not been a religion on the grow in recent generations. I think the figure lately is 16% of the population are practicing Buddhists, which is low, certainly, compared to what it was in the Three Kingdoms period when it was the state religion. But that also does not capture the cachet of Buddhism. I think it has a certain cool among young Koreans, as well as people of other nationalities as well. It's of global religions, I think it has the widest appeal in a cultural sense. People are willing to sort of hear out Buddhism, are willing to pay visits to Buddhist sites of pilgrimage. Here in Korea, Buddhist temples are big for tourists. From all parts of the world, they come here and they not just visit Buddhist temples, they go and do a temple stay, or they eat temple cuisine, which is good for the vegetarians who come here, and there are more vegetarians among foreign tourists than among Koreans themselves, I suspect. But it is, yes, not a religion with many adherents. Actually, practicing Buddhists are hard to come by, ones who are really going through all the rites that you're supposed to go through, spending the time at the temple you're supposed to spend time at. Those are harder to come by. So you have a shrinking religion, although there are not many religions that are growing strong and fast in Korea. But at the same time, it's one with a cultural power which tells you that, well, it reflects an endurance Buddhism has shown in Korea before. Because, as I say, this was the state religion in the Three Kingdoms period. And then it was not quite stamped out, but driven out of official society during the 500 years of the Joseon dynasty. And so monks couldn't even enter Seoul, let alone run their temples here. And Buddhism was then pushed out to the mountains. Temples were only way out there. To practice Buddhism, you'd have to be outside Korean society to one degree or another, usually to a fairly large degree. And so during that time, Buddhism became associated with the mountains, with natural remoteness. That aesthetic and that way of life as well, and that sensibility is retained in Korean Buddhism today. It became characteristic of Buddhism in its Korean version, which has become very distinctive, and I think respected by Koreans as well. They see, rightly or wrongly, Buddhism, even if they don't practice it, as a kind of repository of the sort of real Korean values, or the real Korean way of life, or the way of seeing the world and nature. So, in short, I think that Buddhism can stay on as a repository of those values, but those are not necessarily values young people are primed to go right in for right away. It's something that monks have said when interviewed on this subject. It's, well, maybe young people aren't Buddhists now, maybe they're not practicing now or don't even care about Buddhism per se, but later on, later in life, maybe that can be the time they come around. And even if they don't become Buddhists, they can gain a greater appreciation for the religion, which leads to it having more weight in society, or carrying more weight in society. It's possible, but for the moment, yes, I do think the robots, they'll attract attention, certainly. I mean, but this is not the first stunt of this kind. I remember in Japan years ago, there was a Buddhist priest who turned into a sort of techno DJ, and he would give raves at a temple in an attempt, again, to draw young people to this Buddhist place. And Japanese Buddhism is having similar problems. If anything, it's has declined more than Korean Buddhism. So, try anything. I think if any religion can become relevant in the world of the 2020s, Buddhism's probably the one. So good luck to them. Whether the robot can do it or not, I'm not sure. But Korea, as we've said here many times, Korea brings into practice technologies a little before they're fully useful. So I think Gabi, the robot monk, is sort of par for the course in that sense.
Gabi has a daunting task ahead of it then. And
Indeed.
we'll wait and see then. All right, Colin, thank you so much for your time and your thoughts.
Thank you.
Kelly, thank you very much for your insights.
Thank you too.
Right, that is all the time we have for this edition of Press Perspective. Thank you for watching. Be sure to join us again same time tomorrow for more panel discussion.